The MPC also decided by a majority of 5 out of 6 members to remain focused on withdrawal of accommodation to ensure that inflation progressively aligns to the target while supporting growth. On the demand side, steady expansion is seen in urban consumption while rural demand is showing signs of revival. Looking ahead, domestic demand conditions are likely to benefit from sustained buoyancy in services, consumer and business optimism, government's continued thrust on capex, healthy balance sheets of banks and corporates, and supply chain normalization. Headwinds from geopolitical tensions and geoeconomic fragmentation, volatility in global financial markets, global economic slowdown, and uneven monsoon, however, pose risks to the outlook. Taking all these factors into consideration, real GDP growth for the current financial year, that is 2023-24, is projected at 6.5%, with Q2 at 6.5%, Q3 at 6%, and Q4 at 5.7%. The risks are evenly balanced. Real GDP growth for the first quarter of next financial year, that is 24-25, is projected at 6.6%. I would now like to focus on inflation. The heightened inflation levels in July and August at 7.4% and 6.8% respectively were largely driven by food price pressures. Vegetables, with a weight of around 6% in CPI basket, contributed to about 1/3 of CPI headline inflation in July and to around 1/4 of overall inflation in the month of August. Sustained inflationary pressures in cereals, pulses, and spices added to the overall food inflation. On the positive side, core inflation softened to 4.9% during July and August. It has eased by around 140 basis points, 140. It has eased by around, that is, core inflation has eased by around 140 basis points from its recent peak in January 2023. Further disinflation of the core component is critical for price stability. As evident from our survey, there is further progress on anchoring of inflation expectations, which entered single-digit zone for the first time since COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this is a part of the surveys which we have done, so let me repeat this sentence for better clarity. As evident from our survey, there is further progress in anchoring of inflation expectations, which entered single-digit zone for the first time since COVID-19 pandemic, and the numbers are given in the footnote. While near-term inflation is expected to soften on the back of vegetable price correction, especially in tomatoes, and the reduction in LPG prices, the future trajectory will be conditioned by a number of factors. For Kharif crops, the area sown under pulses is below the level a year ago. Kharif onion production also needs to be watched closely. Demand-supply mismatches in spices are likely to keep these prices at elevated levels. The inflation trajectory will also be shaped by the El Nino conditions and global food and energy prices. In fact, global food and energy prices, if you see, over the last several months, they have been considerably volatile and they require careful monitoring, but that imparts further uncertainty to the inflation outlook. Now, taking into account these factors, CPI inflation is projected at 5.4% for 23-24, with second quarter, that is Q2 at 6.4%, Q3 at 5.6%, and Q4 at 5.2%. The risks are evenly balanced. CPI inflation for the first quarter of next financial year, that is 24-25, is projected at 5.2%. Now, what do these inflation and growth conditions mean for monetary policy? Let me try and answer. Over the last 1.5 years, monetary policy actions broadly included compression of excess liquidity in the system, increase in policy repo rate by 250 basis points, and change in policy stance to withdrawal of accommodation to keep inflation expectations anchored and break the stickiness of core inflation. Complementing these measures were proactive supply-side interventions by the government to improve domestic availability of key food items and reduce input costs. Consequently, headline inflation moderated to 4.6% in the first quarter of the current financial year, that is from April, May and June of the current financial year 23-24, as compared to 7.3% in the first quarter of last year. So last year in the first quarter it was 7.3%. This year in the first quarter the headline inflation moderated to 4.6%. A significant easing of inflation pressures from its exceptionally high level in July and August is expected to materialize in September as the impact of fleeting food price shocks wane. Further, underlying inflation pressures are also moderating while the impact of past monetary policy actions is still unfolding. Even so, indications are that throughout much of the third quarter of the current financial year, food inflation pressures may not see much easing, or rather may not see sustained easing. External factors like energy prices and financial market conditions continue to be volatile. All these call for careful monitoring of the incoming data and the outlook. That is, we have to monitor not only the incoming data but also the build-up of the future, the outlook, to clearly delineate the durable components of price shocks from its transitory elements. Monetary policy has to be in absolute readiness to take appropriate and timely action to prevent any spillovers from food and fuel price shocks to underlying inflation trends and risks to anchoring of inflation expectations. These are non-negotiable necessities.